Hey everyone, this is super exciting. I am bringing you today a real pilot to talk about the Earth and aviation and everything associated with it. Now, for those of you that have been involved in this flat Earth versus globe debate for many years, you will know this pilot that I'm with today. This is Wolfie of the YouTube channel Wolfie6020. Wolfie, so great to be with you today.
Fantastic, and thanks for the invitation, Will. Hello, everybody. This is Wolfie, and I'm very pleased to be with Will today to discuss aviation matters.
Awesome. Now, Wolfie, a lot of people don't know your story and how you got involved in this whole debate over the flat Earth. So let's talk about that. We have to go all the way back into the past, and I believe you were in Brazil. Tell us that story.
That's correct, and the irony of when I encountered flat earthers is that I was halfway through a circumnavigation of the globe. We had flown from Sydney to Christchurch in New Zealand, and then across to Argentina and up to Brazil for the Olympic Games. And it was while we were sitting in Brazil for 3 weeks that I first saw flat earthers on YouTube. And probably wouldn't have given it much thought, except some of the videos were popping up were related to aviation. And everything I saw was completely wrong. So I thought, okay, this is interesting. The first video I saw was from Eric Dubay, and it was talking about the horizon always rising to eye level. Now, in the type of aircraft that I fly, we're at very high altitudes. We go up to 45,000 feet and above, and we're actually trained to identify that the horizon will be below horizontal. It's in the head-up display. It's actually in the flight manual of the aircraft that states this is due to the curvature of the Earth. So I started to think about how I can respond to that. And on the trip back from Brazil, we went to Cape Town, Africa, and then we went across to Perth and back to Sydney. And on the trip back, I made a number of videos, which are some of the first videos on my channel.
Amazing. So we're going to talk about all these issues during this interview, which I'm really excited about. But the first thing that happened when you started engaging with flat earthers on these issues and you told them that you were a pilot, what was their response?
They immediately thought I was lying. They did not believe that I was a pilot. They wanted proof that I was a pilot. And I got called a liar many, many times. The amount of times that flat earthers would say, "You're not a real pilot, you're a liar, you're an agent." It was just comical. It was like a whole new experience of how people treat you when you talk to them, and it was like complete disbelief, you know. And for me, it was very easy to prove that I was a pilot. Show footage from the aircraft, show footage of myself, you know. So it was something that came later on my channel, and I think there were a couple of people. Bob Nodell was one that actually accepted I was a pilot, but majority of flat earthers I was encountering, the sort of the no-name people that were just commenting on my channel, they just did not believe it.
Yeah, this is a common theme in the flat earth community, is anything that they don't like or they can't refute, they will just say is fake.
Absolutely.
So you come in and you say, hey guys, I'm a pilot. The things that you're saying are not true. I'm speaking from a place of expertise and experience. They immediately say, no, you can't be a real pilot. You're a fake pilot. This is so crazy. They've even called me a fake pastor.
Yes.
So this is what they do. Now, I want to cover something which I think is important to just highlight how the flat earth community as a whole acts, and that is this. There is a long history of flat earthers lying about being pilots, and you've dealt with them. Let's start with Bob Nodell. Bob Nodell was making a public claim that he was a commercial pilot, and tell me how you reacted to that.
Yeah, when I first started, I had people commenting on my channel that Bob Nodell was a commercial pilot and he disagrees with me and that he's going to tear me to shreds. You know, that was the information I was going to say, okay, come and talk to me, Bob. So Bob actually did comment on my channel, and in that comment, he mentioned that he was a commercial pilot, that he had a multi-engine rating and an instrument rating, which allows you to fly in poor weather. And what he probably didn't realize is that there is a public database where we can look up any FAA licensed pilot and you can see all their credentials. So very shortly after that, I looked him up and I realized he wasn't a commercial pilot. He was a private pilot, single engine aeroplane only, no instrument rating. But the important thing is his last medical was in 1978. And for a private pilot, a medical is valid for 3 years. So 1978 to 1981, he probably had not flown an aeroplane since 1981.
Wow. And then the next flat earther was a flat earther who went by the name of Pilot LX.
Correct.
Let's talk about him.
Pilot LX was being featured on a number of flat earth channels showing footage from the cockpit of an aircraft. And I have a number of videos on my channel inviting flat earth pilots to come and talk aviation with me. He actually did show up. And it's very easy when you start using correct aircraft jargon, especially at the commercial pilot and the air transport pilot level, to pick a fraud, you know. And as soon as I started asking him questions, he was stumped. He was flustered, and within days of communicating on my channel, he basically left hurling insults behind him, and I never saw any more about him. So for me, it's very easy to spot a fraud. You know, I've got 11,000 flying hours. I've been in aviation since I was 16 years old. I'm now 60 years old. I've been a flying instructor. I've been in police aviation. I've been in corporate aviation. I know how pilots talk. I know how they react from student pilot right up to air transport pilot, and it's so easy to spot a fraud.
Incredible. And then another flat earther you came in contact with went by the name Vertical Freedom.
Yes.
Let's talk about him.
Vertical Freedom, I first came across him on a channel called Paul on the Plane, where he interviewed this guy, Vertical Freedom, who went by the name of Zach on that video. And he claimed that he used to fly a Gulfstream, and he flew from Brisbane direct to New York and flew over Alaska. Well, firstly, the plane doesn't have that range. And when you plot the route, it doesn't go anywhere near Alaska. And digging a little deeper, I don't want to expose the gentleman's name, but digging a little deeper, it turns out he actually was a helicopter pilot, but he has no jet experience at all. So he was lying about flying the Gulfstream, lying about the Brisbane to New York flight, but he was a helicopter pilot.
And this is important. The reason he was lying about that flight was to try to give credibility and credence to the AE map.
Correct.
Because a straight flight on that map would have gone over Alaska.
Correct.
Now, the latest flat earther who lied about being a pilot was Stephen Alonso. Stephen Alonso wrote a book called something like A Pilot's Journey to Flat Earth, and I had him on our channel, and he admitted that the book is all completely fabricated. What's crazy, though, is I've spoken to so many people who have shown me that they have personally communicated with Stephen Alonso, both in public on forums and also in private messages like on Facebook. And they've said over the years they've debated him because they were questioning whether or not he was a real pilot. And he was answering their questions, trying to convince them that he was a real pilot. So we have this history in the flat earth community of people lying about being pilots. And I think the only reason is because pilots know that we live on a globe.
Absolutely.
That's their training is globe-based, their flight planning is globe-based, all of it is. And so I also want to mention too, you mentioned Paul on the Plane.
Yes.
Paul on the Plane is one of the fortunate flat earthers who is no longer a flat earther.
I have heard that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks in part to the final experiment.
Absolutely.
And so there's a lot of good that's happening. Let's now talk about the issues. And my goal in this is to completely refute all of the things that flat earthers say in regards to aviation by actually talking to a real pilot. Now, for the record, I tried to find a flat earth pilot to join us for this interview, and I couldn't. I even opened it up to any retired pilots, anyone who's ever flown a plane that believes the earth is flat, to give another take or another side, and I just simply cannot find one. I'm not so sure a true flat earth pilot even exists.
I totally agree with you, Will. Yeah, I've been asking for years to debate a flat earth pilot, and they just always run away, you know, or very quickly during the conversation I expose them as being complete frauds. Yeah.
So the first thing I want to cover is, I hear this all the time, flat earthers claim that pilots are trained on a flat earth and not a globe, but I'm guessing nothing could be further from the truth.
That is completely incorrect. You know, I can remember very clearly going to my pilot theory courses in Sydney, Australia in the 80s, and we had a globe in the classroom, and all our textbooks show the globe, the great circles, The calculations are based on spherical math for a globe Earth. Yeah, absolutely ridiculous to claim that pilots are trained for a flat Earth. That has never crossed my mind or crossed my path in my 40 plus years of aviation.
So I'm guessing if we were to look in your flight manuals, in your training manuals, in your FAA documents,
Absolutely.
they're going to talk about the globe.
Absolutely, and one document I have on my channel it's an FAA order that specifically relates to how they design the instrument approaches that are used for pilots in bad weather. And there's two basic types. There's one type which is following a beam to the ground. That is actually a straight line from the ground, but there's another one called a Barrow VNAV, which is actually following a GPS lateral path and an altitude based on the altimeter on the aircraft. That is actually a curved path that factors in the curvature of the Earth. And I can show you the FAA document that specifically demonstrates this and also shows you the calculation they use and the radius of the Earth used in their calculation. So you cannot deny the fact that the FAA absolutely factors in curvature when they're designing these approaches.
Now, I've also heard flat earthers try to claim that software training, like flight simulator software, is a flat earth, but I don't even think that's true.
Completely wrong. Even Microsoft Flight Simulator, X-Plane is another good software based. They're all based on a globe. And if you look at how the software is designed, it's all based on the WGS84 spheroid, which is the Earth. It's the same database, the same datum that we use in our aviation apps, in all the instrument approach charts, in the flight management system in the aircraft. Yeah.
Now, there seems to be a huge misunderstanding when it comes to flat earthers and aviation. And this huge misunderstanding leads to things like them thinking taking a spirit level on a plane would somehow settle this debate over flat earth and globe. What is this misunderstanding that they have causing them to come up with these bizarre experiments?
It comes down to one thing. They do not understand how up and down works on a globe. If you could pass me that globe, I can do a quick demonstration. It seems that there are some, and I never say all, I always say some flat earthers who believe that south is down, okay? But on the globe, down is towards the center of the globe. So my finger is showing the direction of down at various points on the globe. And not understanding this, and not understanding that if you have a direction of down, you have 90 degrees to that, that's horizontal. So that's how aircraft instruments define horizontal, by knowing the direction of down and going 90 degrees to that. That's horizontal. So when we talk about pitch attitude, we'll come back to that later, the horizontal that they're referring to is 90 degrees to down, and that direction of down changes around the Earth. If they could understand that, most of their claims and arguments are just empty, worthless information, because it does not apply to the situation on the Earth.
Now, I remember Rob Skiba, before he passed away, was talking about taking a spirit level onto a plane. Probably most famously, D. Marble, a flat earther,
yes.
Not only took a spirit level on a plane, but also filmed it.
Yes.
And they seemed to think that this shows that we don't live on a globe and that the Earth is flat. The biggest misunderstanding that I see on this particular spirit level thing is in their assumption, based on where you start on the globe, the spirit level would maybe look like this.
Yeah.
If you started here, and then as you traveled along the globe, it would change. So, but what they're not acknowledging is that no matter where you are on the globe, you're going to start here.
Yes.
And so let's demonstrate that here. I'll let you hold this.
The difference is, if I can just show that, flat earthers think this should happen.
Yes.
But what actually happens if you hold the spirit level is this. So the spirit level is always at the position of up, because up is opposite to down, and down is always towards the center of the globe.
Yes.
Yep.
Now, one of the things that I hear most frequently from flat earthers is something about pitch data.
Yes.
And they like to bring up pitch data, which I think is just another misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
And they seem to think that the pitch data is going to drastically and radically change throughout a flight around the globe. explain why that's not the case.
It's the same fundamental problem of not understanding that down changes direction as you follow the globe. And because down is changing direction, so is horizontal. Again, if we have the globe. So if we look at the globe here, horizontal is there, but if we move to this part of the Earth, horizontal is like that. Now, pitch data is being measured from horizontal at the location of the aircraft. And what flat earthers believe, or what some of them claim, is that this is the only horizontal there is. And so that as the plane goes around, it should be pitching down from this horizontal. What they're not realizing is that the horizontal is changing with the curvature of the Earth. 1 degree for every 60 nautical miles. Pitch data is measured from the horizontal at the aeroplane. Yeah.
Now, I brought along this little model airplane, which has a pitch to it.
Yes.
Should we give it a number?
Oh, that would be about 5-10 degrees, yeah.
Okay,
that's
so
fine. Yeah.
so this model airplane here, which I think is a 737, has about a 5 to a 10 degree pitch on it. And so if I put it on this globe here, and this flight is now flying around the globe, has the pitch changed?
It hasn't. It hasn't. When you look at it externally, as we see, it looks like the plane is pitching down. But again, if you look at it from the perspective of the aeroplane, where the pitch data is actually being derived from, it's not changing at all as it flies around curve.
Yeah, and the important thing is I can move this plane anywhere along this globe, and the pitch is not changing. So understanding the globe model and the globe predictions is important because planes can fly over the curve and the pitch doesn't change. And so for people to really understand this, it's from the perspective of the plane.
Absolutely. And again, if we do that same demonstration, the plane is there. What the plane is seeing is this. The pitch data is being derived at the aircraft, and down is always directly down towards the center of the Earth. So it makes perfect sense that flying around a globe, the pitch data is not going to change. This is the massive misunderstanding the flat earthers have. Yeah.
Yes. So what I like to refer to this as is actually a straw man.
Absolutely.
So when a flat earther makes a claim that the pitch data should drastically change on the globe model, that's a straw man.
Completely.
That
It's
is not
completely
what the
incorrect.
globe predicts. That is not what you understand and what happens in aviation. And so this is important to point out. What I tried to do with the final experiment was to make sure that I was accurately representing the flat earth side. I was not creating a straw man position that I could easily tear down. And so it's important to actually understand what the other people think and what their actual predictions are. So what I see a lot is flat earthers will make what they call globe predictions, but in reality it's just a straw man setup of what is true.
100% true. 100% true.
Let's talk about flight planning. This is a big one because the flight paths on a globe versus a flat earth would be drastically different.
Absolutely.
Planes need to get to their location. They need to get there in as short of a time as safely possible.
Yes.
They need to make sure they have enough fuel. And no one's going to fly on a commercial airline that is getting to locations in much longer times than other airlines.
Correct.
So everyone's using the same flight planning.
Yes.
Is flight planning done on a globe or a flat earth?
It's absolutely done on a globe. I've got my app here, which is what I use in the aircraft all the time. And you can see very clearly that it's a globe. We put our flight plans on that. We can overlay the instrument approach charts. We can pan around. You know, that particular route that I've marked on there now is from Sydney to San Diego. And you can see that when you look directly above it, it will appear as a straight line. So yeah, absolutely false that flight planning is done on a flat earth. It's 100% done on a globe. And if we can bring up the globe, I'll show you something that might make it a bit more intuitive. If you pick any two locations on the globe, let's say we were here and we wanted to go to here, how you find the shortest route is you would put a piece of string between 2 points and you would pull it as tight as possible, and it will then naturally fall across the great circle track. And you can do that between any 2 points on a globe. A bit of string here and a bit of string here, pull it tight, and that will then show you the Great Circle path.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the Great Circle route is what is used by pilots to get from
Always.
point A to point B.
Always, yeah.
And let's talk about the Southern Hemisphere. You're obviously from Australia.
Yes.
So you're intimately familiar with the Southern Hemisphere. The Southern Hemisphere, in my mind, ever since I got into this whole flat Earth debate, was the key to settling the debate and it completely ending flat Earth.
Yes.
Because the Southern Hemisphere on a globe, south of the equator, everything gets closer and closer together.
Yes.
But on a flat Earth, everything gets further and further apart. And so when we get to the Southern Hemisphere,
Yes.
and we have flights that are going to go from, say, South America all the way to Australia, they're going to follow what we're talking about here, which is the Great Circle route, which is the shortest distance between 2 points on a sphere.
Correct.
And when you get really far south, you're actually going to find that you're going to head in a southerly direction toward Antarctica, and then kind of come back up north to, say, go from Santiago to Sydney.
Yes.
And so flat earthers for years, they first denied that these flights existed.
Yes.
How many times did you hear that?
All the time. And the funniest part is I heard that within a week of having just done one, having flown from, where were we? From Sydney, Australia. We were going to Santiago in Chile, the big flight. But the aircraft I was flying at the time didn't quite have the range to make it non-stop. So we stopped in Christchurch, New Zealand to refuel. But then from Christchurch, we were flying across to Santiago. Now, as it turned out, our arrival time was early in the morning. There was fog, so we ended up landing in Argentina, which was our alternate. But our flight was absolutely in the Southern Hemisphere at all times, and it went quite a way further south than the latitude of both Christchurch and Santiago.
Now, once these flights were shown to be real, the flat earthers had to pivot. Let's ignore the fact that they actually said that if these flights were real, that would end flat Earth and it would prove the globe. They have a history of doing that as
Yes.
well. They then pivoted and they started to claim that these planes were not flying the Great Circle route and were instead flying a straight route over a flat Earth map, over an AE map to get there, which then meant that the back of the seat showing you the flight route was being faked. They would take magnetic compasses onto planes and try to show, oh, it's actually flying in a different direction. Talk about that, and especially why using a magnetic compass on a plane is not a good idea.
Absolutely. And I have videos on my channel that demonstrate this. I've taken a magnetic compass on our aircraft and on a number of commercial aircraft. I've placed it at various positions on the tray table, on the side panel in the aircraft, in our cockpit, and you can see that any metal near the compass is going to affect its position. Literally by moving this compass a few inches on the tray table, it can be pointing in completely the opposite direction. The compass that we have in an aircraft, it's especially shielded. It's located in a position where it will minimize the amount of interference, and it is also, we have, not in this aircraft, but in the smaller aircraft, we have a compass deviation card, so that when the compass is set up in the aircraft, they go out and they measure at different directions how much error is in the magnetic compass caused by the metal in the airframe, and they have a little deviation correction card in the aircraft. But yeah, to think that you can use a basic handheld hiking compass on an aircraft inside a metal frame and expect accurate results, it's completely unrealistic.
Yeah, and now that the Santiago to Sydney flight has been confirmed, our mutual friend Critical Think
Yes.
just took this flight, filmed the entire thing on his way home from being in Antarctica with the final experiment.
Yes.
Now that this flight has been shown to be a real flight and that the path is not going on a straight line on a flat Earth, that was very easy to show because people who take this flight can film out the window and occasionally see Antarctica.
Yeah.
And they also travel to the south of New Zealand
Yes.
before coming up north to Sydney. And so now on a flat Earth, which takes the southern hemisphere and makes it just huge, it takes the southern hemisphere and it puts it like this, they now have to make a route that goes 2 to 3 times the distance to accurately map what people are seeing out the window. And that flight is just not possible either.
No, that's right. And I think a lot of the explanation they have for that is that the aeroplane is flying in extremely strong jet streams. Now, you're never going to get a jet stream that is 100% favourable to your flight in both directions, you know. It's going one way. So, as an example, we fly Sydney to Perth quite often, and going from Sydney to Perth, we're usually flying into a headwind. Coming Perth to Sydney, we're usually flying with a tailwind. So there's about an hour difference in the flight time, you know, going to Perth and then coming back. It's usually faster coming back. But their argument is that the aeroplane's in a jet stream that is adding hundreds and hundreds of miles per hour to the speed to explain the extra distance. And another thing I've heard is that the planes fly faster than what we're told. Completely wrong. You know, this aeroplane that I fly, it's nice, it's fast, it can cruise up to 90% of the speed of sound, but it can't fly faster than the speed of sound. You know, it's not designed for that. The type of engines it has won't operate faster than the speed of sound efficiently. It's just a ridiculous claim, especially to think that airliners are flying faster than the speed of sound. It doesn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we hear from flat earthers a lot that, and again, it's their misunderstanding that a plane would constantly have to nose down to get over the curvature of the Earth. But what they don't realize is in creating these impossible flight paths for these nonstop flights in the southern hemisphere, they're actually making a huge curved path,
Yes.
which is not real. No pilot is going to fly that, which actually would mean that the plane is banking, even if it's slight,
Yes.
is banking the entire time. Not only is that not true, there are instruments in the cockpit which would show if that was happening.
Yeah, the attitude indicator shows us angle of bank. It's not super precise to down to the decimal points of a degree, but if we were turning at all, it would indicate on the artificial horizon. Yeah.
And when you fly these southern hemisphere flights, which you do all the time, nonstop southern hemisphere flights,
Yeah.
you're not banking the entire time.
We're not banking. What we're actually doing, a flight plan will consist of multiple waypoints. So even though Sydney to San Diego might be a great circle route, we may not always fly that perfect great circle route because the flight planning computations will take into account other factors such as the wind, weather. You know, for example, the Great Circle route might be a straight line, but if we go a little bit further north, we're going to be in much stronger tailwinds. So we'll do that. The flight planning computation will take you slightly north to benefit from the winds. It will always try to design the most efficient flight path based on the winds. And if you're going the opposite direction, it may take you further south than the perfect Great Circle to avoid stronger headwinds. You know, so Great Circle is ideal in nil wind. In reality, there can be variations to that based on the wind.
Yeah, the Great Circle route is a mere starting point.
Absolutely.
But then there's other factors which you're going to take into consideration for speed, time, fuel efficiency, and
Yes.
safety.
Yes.
But you're never going to have variations that would make sense on a flat Earth and not a globe.
No, that's right. That's exactly right. And the other point I wanted to make is on a long flight, we have multiple waypoints. Now, the waypoints might be cities that we fly over. They might be latitude and longitude coordinates over the ocean. But the reason we have waypoints is it's a check. So we're flying from one waypoint to the next. And when you line them all up, they're basically as close as possible to the Great Circle. But the flight management system, our flight plans, have these multiple waypoints. And at each one, we do a fuel check, we do a time check, we report to air traffic control. Now the aircraft does it automatically. It's automatically communicating. But each waypoint, we do a position report, we do a flight plan check, we do a fuel log check. But the key point is, between each waypoint, it's a Great Circle track. So from this one to this one, we're flying a Great Circle. Now we're at this point, there may be a slight turn, we're now flying a Great Circle to the next one. And that's how every track and distance on a flight plan is calculated. Great Circle to Great Circle to Great Circle to Great Circle between waypoints. Yeah.
Now, Wolfie, one of my favorite things was at the very beginning of you getting into this whole flat Earth debate when they were saying that you're a fake pilot and that you're lying. One of the things you did is you were actually interacting with a flat earther while you were in the air.
Correct, yeah.
And so my question to you is, how did you have internet access when you're flying at 40,000 feet?
The aircraft I fly and the previous one have satellite-based internet that essentially works all around the world. It's quite an expensive system, obviously. It's not as fast as NBN or broadband. It's reasonably quick, but it's satellite-based. The satellite antenna is in the tail of the aircraft, and we have an app that shows the different regions. You know, it's communicating with the geostationary satellites, and as we fly around the Earth, it may lock onto one satellite for a period of time, and when it becomes closer to the region of the next one, the little dish will transmit across. And sometimes we can be flying across the Pacific and we'll have momentary dropouts in the internet access, 1 or 2 minutes, and that's while it's moving from one satellite to the next. But essentially, we can fly anywhere in the world and have good internet access. Yeah.
Now, flat earthers tell us that internet is mainly coming from undersea cables. So let me just take a wild guess that the satellite antenna on the plane is on the top of the plane and not the bottom.
Absolutely, it's on the tail. It's right up on the top of the tail. Yeah.
So as close to the satellites as possible.
There is a option for corporate aircraft to get Starlink, and it's something that we're considering. We're looking at the pros and cons of that. It's a fairly major operation where they have to cut into the airframe to put the big flat panel antenna on top. But yeah, you can go online, you can have a look at Starlink for aviation, and it will give you photos of what it looks like, and that gives you extremely fast speeds. You use Starlink in Antarctica, you know how well it works, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about something which got you into flat Earth at the very beginning,
Yes.
which was Eric Dubay claiming that the horizon always rises to eye level.
Correct.
Now, interestingly enough, Austin Whitsitt made this same claim to us at dinner when we were in Chile before flying to Antarctica. So this is something that has been stated by flat earthers for a decade now. They're still saying it. Here's what I've seen is that if you go, say, into a hotel and you go to the top floor, the horizon still looks like you're at eye level.
Yes.
But you're really not that high off the ground considering the size of the Earth.
Correct.
Now, a pilot, someone who routinely flies at 40 and even 45,000 feet, tell us, does the horizon rise to your eye level up there?
No, it definitely doesn't. And it's actually in our flight manual. It states specifically that the horizon will be below horizontal due to the curvature of the Earth. I can send you a picture of that page of the flight manual. But it's only a small amount, and this is where the confusion comes in. At 45,000 feet, it's only 3.7 degrees down from horizontal, and that's not much. You know, like if I told you to look across at the other side of the hangar and tell me if something is at eye level, if it's a few degrees up or down, you can't see that with your eye. And what I've always considered is that when you're looking at the horizon, it's not that your horizon is rising to eye level, it's that your eye will naturally look at the horizon, okay? And your eyes are not calibrated to measure 1 or 2 degree increments, you know? So if you're in an aeroplane at 35,000 feet and you see the horizon and you look at it, you're going to look at the horizon, you think, well, that looks like my eye level. But in reality, it's a few degrees below. In the aircraft that I operate and the previous one, we have a head-up display, which is a visual depiction of essential flight data, and specifically the pitch attitude of the aircraft, and also the true horizontal line. And I've got videos about this on my channel showing the true horizon line, which is true horizontal, and the Earth horizon is several degrees below. You can actually see it in the pitch scale. It shows you how many degrees below it is. As well as that, there's been other times where we've been flying across the ocean and we see the sun setting or the sun rising, and when the sun first comes up over the horizon, you can see the sunlight streaming into the aeroplane in an upwards direction. I've got a number of videos of that where I look at the sun and then you look inside the aircraft and the sun is hitting the ceiling of the roof of the cockpit. Yeah.
So there's a good challenge for flat earthers right there, which is how does the sun light up the ceiling of the cockpit of a plane flying at that height?
Yes.
I think there is literally no answer that they can give. Now, just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, on the globe, the horizon should drop as you increase in altitude.
Correct.
And so using this instrument in the plane, this head-up display, this HUD, I'm guessing that when you're on the ground, you see the horizon at one place, and then as you increase altitude, you see that horizon dropping below eye level.
100%. You know, if you're looking at ground level, the HUD horizon line is on the horizon. You know, if you've got a clear view, sometimes at an airport it's not easy when you've got buildings and whatnot, but if you can see a clear horizon, that horizon line will be exactly on the Earth's horizon when you're at ground level. And the higher you go, the gap continues to increase. I have another video on my channel from a different aircraft that shows that from taking off to climb, and you can steadily see the Earth horizon dropping from the HUD horizon line.
Incredible. Now, the question that we get all the time, I get it almost daily at this point due to my involvement in this place with the final experiment, is why can't we see the curvature? So flat earthers are always asking this question, where's the curve? And the easy response from the globe side is you can see the curve if you get high enough, if you
Absolutely.
get high enough off the earth. So here's my question for you as a pilot.
Yes.
Who should be able to answer this question is, can you see the curve when you're flying?
100%, and I have actually photographed it and filmed it in videos. If I could just grab the globe for a minute, again, the mistake flat earthers make is they believe that a pilot should be able to see this curve. Now, in reality, at 45,000 feet, we're only just on this scale, slightly above the Earth. So what we can see is probably about that much. We could probably only see about that much of the Earth at 45,000 feet. And what we're looking at is that horizon, which is at our field of view. So it's only such a tiny part of the Earth that we're actually looking at. We're not seeing the 1 degree per 60 nautical mile curvature. We're seeing the edge of that small circle of our vision, and that's the curvature that we're seeing. So it's not the curvature of the Earth, it's curvature of the horizon based on the small circle of our field of vision. When I say small circle, it's about 250 nautical miles from 45,000 feet. So in all directions, we're only seeing the horizon at about that distance. But absolutely it is evident. Yeah.
Now, with my limited experience, you've been doing this a lot longer than I have, flat earthers will reject any evidence that you give them which goes against a flat earth and supports the globe.
Yes.
So I'm guessing they've rejected your pictures and your videos of this curvature. And one thing that I would predict, which is pretty easy to predict just once you're in the mind of flat earthers, is they're probably going to say that if there's visible curvature in a picture or video that you took from the cockpit, that it's due to curvature of the windows in the plane.
Yes.
Deal with that.
That is exactly true, Will. I've had that claim many times made by flat earthers, and as a rebuttal, I have shown footage from inside the cockpit looking at straight lines in the hangar, proving that there is no curvature induced by the cockpit. And I've had friends come out, some of my subscribers that live in Perth, they have come out and witnessed it themselves. But I've shown it in videos as well.
Yeah, one of the difficult things I found is getting flat earthers to tell you what they would accept, right? What kind of a camera, what kind of a lens, what kind of a test to show you that the window in the plane or the window in the cockpit is not causing this curvature. And they don't really want to do that, because once they say, I will accept this, we know the truth of reality, we'll be able to provide that, and then they'll kind of be stuck.
Yes.
Now let's talk about something else which flat earthers have made a huge deal about over the years, which is emergency landings.
Yes.
So our mutual acquaintance, Eddie Alencar,
Yes.
who goes by Flat Earth Banjo, he's made such a big deal about this. He's actually written a book about it. And so flat earthers seem to think that emergency landings prove flat Earth and refute the globe, but when you take a close look at it, that's just not the case.
Absolutely not the case. I've had some dealings with Eddie. Back in, before 2020, I was communicating with him quite a bit. I was explaining his errors. A lot of his errors, if I could just grab the globe, is that when he is presenting his own videos, he's producing another straw man by drawing the incorrect route as it should be on a globe. So, for example, there's a very famous one where the aircraft diverted to Alaska, I think it was. Yeah, diverted up to Alaska, and it was flying across, and he believed that it should have been diverting to Hawaii. But if you actually draw it correctly on the globe, the Great Circle route, Alaska was the obvious choice. So we talked about it many times. We were looking at going to Tokyo for the Olympic Games in 2020, before the pandemic hit, and I communicated with Eddie. I said, look, I'm coming to Japan, that's where he's located. Let's meet up face to face. Let's discuss this. I'll go over the points with you. He immediately became defensive and started making excuses to not meet up and not have a live debate. He told me that he was unwell, that he was sick, he was not well enough to meet somebody face to face. He also told me that he was going to stop making videos. And I thought, okay, taking a person in good faith, I believed him. I said, okay, no problem, we'll let it go. He then blocked me, deleted my comments, and kept right on going.
Wow. Now, let's talk a little bit more about emergency landings, because what I've found is that flat earthers will do what I call surface level research,
Yes.
which is YouTube videos and TikTok videos, and heavy confirmation bias.
Yes.
So they'll find one thing that confirms what they already believe, and then they'll run with it. Whereas I like to do deep research. I like to keep going, keep asking questions,
Yes.
keep challenging. And so their surface level understanding of an emergency landing is that you would just go to the closest runway or the closest airport, but that's not what you would do either. Talk about the different levels of an emergency
Yes.
that a pilot might face on a flight, and how they decide where they're going to land.
That's a really good point, Will, and that is a consideration that flat earthers do not look at. Talking to Eddie, he believed that in every emergency situation, you should go to the closest airport. Now, when we fly from Sydney to the USA, we have Hawaii as one of our alternate airports en route, and there's another place called Cassidy Island. Now, Cassidy Island is basically just a runway on a small island with no facilities. Now, it depends on the nature of the emergency. We can have an engine on fire. It sounds traumatic, but we can shut the engine down, we can put the fire out, we can continue quite safely with the remaining engine. If it's more critical than that, if we have severe depressurization and airframe is likely to have a structural failure, then we would want to get on the ground as soon as possible. But another scenario is a sick passenger. We're flying from Sydney to the USA. Cassidy Island is 10 minutes away, and suddenly our passenger's starting to have a heart attack. There's no point going to Cassidy Island. There's no hospital, there's no medical facilities. It's actually worse if we landed there and now we're stranded, okay? Then we've got to take off again. In that situation, we would choose to continue to Honolulu, where there is a major hospital, modern facilities, and they can get proper treatment. The point is, there's so many different considerations that flat earthers are not aware of, and I asked this of Eddie. I said, can you list some of the considerations a pilot must make or a flight planning department should make when deciding on where to go in an alternate? And he couldn't produce one. His mindset was that you just must land at the nearest suitable airport in every situation. But we've got factors such as runway length. If the runway is too short, it's useless. If the runway is not strong enough, the pavement strength, if it's not strong enough, you're going to land, you're going to destroy the runway. You're not going to get off again. The availability of fuel, you might have to land for some reason that can be corrected quite easily, but then if you don't have enough fuel to depart, you're stranded. It may be extremely expensive to fly or to bring in a ship with aviation fuel. So some of the remote airports that might be good in a last-ditch emergency requirement may not be the best choice if you have a relatively minor emergency. We then have the weather considerations. If you're diverting to an airport that has weather that is quite severe and the airport is not equipped with the appropriate instrument approach landing, you wouldn't go there. You might fly an extra hour just to get to a better airport. Okay, so as you heard, Will, I just paused then because we had a helicopter landing. It was overpowering our voices, but we'll continue. So yeah, the many considerations that a flight planning department or a pilot has to consider when looking at a divert option, and flat earthers don't consider this. Another one is that we don't have to worry about it in our aircraft, but some airliners, if they take off with a full load of fuel, they cannot land until they have reduced the fuel load, and they do something called fuel dumping. And to dump fuel from, say, a full load down to the point where they can land could take 30 or 40 minutes. Now, that 30 or 40 minutes means they have to keep flying, and it would then again be logical to choose a more suitable airport, even if it was completely off your original course. If it's 40 minutes away, you have to fly that 40 minutes anyway to dump the fuel. So that could explain why you have like a significantly off-track diversion point. The other thing is landing fees. Some airports will charge extreme landing fees. If you've got an airliner with 300 passengers and you're now conducting an emergency landing, what are you going to do with those passengers? Is there accommodation? Can you put them in a hotel? Can you arrange alternate aircraft to pick up these passengers and continue on the flight? There's just so many considerations that flat earthers just don't look at.
Yeah, this is the importance of asking questions and seeking out experts. So a perfect example is I see flat earthers so frequently refuse to reach out to people such as yourself, to reach out to people that are experts, and they just run with information instead of trying to understand it better. A perfect example is Anthony Powell, who filmed the 24-hour sun in Antarctica multiple times, they just called him a liar and didn't reach out to him. I reached out to him and created a relationship with him and found out he's not a liar. He actually does go to Antarctica every year. Same thing happened with you. You come out and say, hey guys, you have this wrong, I'm a pilot. Instead of reaching out and asking questions and trying to understand it, they just immediately call you a liar.
Yeah.
I'm guessing in the last 10 years, you didn't have a lot of flat earthers reaching out to you, trying to understand these issues and asking questions of you.
Almost none. Almost none. I do have a couple of emails where a flat earther has looked at all the evidence, not necessarily just because of me, but perhaps my videos contributed to their research and they've thanked me, you know. And one of them I remember distinctly was a guy called Piku. That was his channel name. He was a strong flat earther. He was around in the days of Chippy the Chipmunk, who was another flat earther. Now, Piku, I communicated with him. He called me a liar. He called me a deceiver, didn't believe I was a pilot, got all the standard abuse, but he did a complete turnaround based on his own research. I believe he did a cruise down around Antarctica. Don't know the full story, but he came back to the globe, and the one sticking point he couldn't understand was the artificial horizon in the aircraft. And I had a video about that, explaining how the artificial horizon can correct, and its ability to correct means it can remain aligned flying around curvature. And he came onto my channel and thanked me. And he said, thank you, Wolfie. He said, I apologize for insulting you in the past. He said, watching this video was the last point that I had to clarify in my mind, you know, and then you've explained how the artificial horizon works. So he came back to the globe. That was many, many years ago. Yeah, so I've had some good experiences.
Yeah, let's talk about the artificial horizon, because this is another thing that flat earthers don't understand. And they seem to think that it's set before you take off and then remains rigid on the flight.
That's completely wrong. And pilots learn about all the errors in the artificial horizon. There are turning and acceleration errors. The artificial horizon aligns itself based on the sensed direction of down. And it does that using pendulous vanes in the instrument. I have a series of detailed videos opening up an artificial horizon. I actually bought one. I bought myself an artificial horizon, powered it up, opened it up, and you can see how the mechanism works. You can see how the pendulous vanes will open and close if the gyro is not aligned correctly, and the airflow that comes out of those vanes will constantly keep aligning the gyro. Now, in my videos, I deliberately throw the gyro off alignment and just sit there and watch it in a time lapse, and it will slowly bring itself back to alignment. So yeah, the fact that the gyro remains rigid in space at all times, completely wrong. In fact, if you perform a turn and you just kept going around and around multiple times for several minutes, the gyro is going to start aligning to the turn, because as you're in a turn, you've got like an artificial direction of down due to the centrifugal force. So it's a combination of normal down and the G-force in the turn. It gives you like a false, it's like a G-force in the turn, and the instrument will start aligning to that over a period of many minutes. And this is why when we fly a holding pattern, when the aircraft is required to go into a holding pattern, we don't fly circles, because that can cause errors to develop in the instrument. We fly oval racetrack patterns. So generally a 180-degree turn, 2 minutes level, 180-degree turn, 2 minutes level. And that way, a single 180-degree turn is not enough for the gyro to start developing errors. And the 2 minutes of straight flight is enough for it to continue remaining correctly aligned.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the importance of reaching out to people who are actually pilots to understand how these things work. This is what true research looks like. And anybody that wants to call themselves a truther and is actually searching for the truth will do something as simple as I do, which is just reach out to these incredible people that are involved in this debate, that are willing to spend the time to educate you and to help you understand these situations. So Wolfie, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Will. True privilege. Yep, thank you.
Awesome.